The air burned even when I breathed through the mask. Cold so clean it tasted metallic, like biting a coin. By the time the sun flattened against the horizon, the world had no sound left, only the hiss of frost shifting under my boots. We'd been briefed for a routine satellite relay inspection, nothing more. Yet as I scanned the terrain, the Arctic stretched like an unending page of white, waiting for a name no one should write. Silence isn't peace out here. It's warning, disguised as stillness. I remember the hum of my own breath inside the mask, the soft click of the thermal scope resetting every few seconds. That was the only rhythm we had left. My squad moved behind me, 5 dark silhouettes swallowed by the brightness. There was no wind, no sky, just white swallowing white. But then the hum broke. A signal blinked on my monitor, a single pulsing heat source, fixed, large, alive. It shouldn't have existed. Nothing human survived unaided this far north. We stopped. I crouched and held up my hand, signaling silence though no one was speaking. I zoomed in grainy edges, a shape too tall to be machinery. I marked the coordinates anyway, wrote them down on the back of my glove with a Sharpie, the ink freezing halfway through the stroke. Procedure over panic. That's the rule. But beneath the training, something old stirred curiosity dressed as duty. The white around us wasn't empty. It was listening. Every sound we made, the crunch of gear, the exhale of steam, vanished too quickly, like the cold was swallowing evidence. I logged the data and sent it to command, but static devoured the reply. I told myself it was just the weather, yet a single thought kept echoing between breaths. Silence has a source. That night, as I unrolled my sleeping bag inside the frozen tent, I could still feel that signal pulsing somewhere beneath the ice. Not moving closer, not fading either, just waiting. And though the world above us slept in white, I knew something below had finally woken. By morning, the horizon looked identical. No sun, no direction, just white stacked on white. Yet something had shifted beneath it. The heat signature from the night before hadn't moved, and that bothered me more than if it had. Stillness can mean death, but it can also mean observation. We hiked toward the coordinates, our compasses twitching with each step as if the land itself refused alignment. The facility appeared suddenly, half swallowed by snowdrifts, a Soviet research outpost, long abandoned on paper but breathing faintly in practice. Rusted doors, collapsed antennae, a cracked red star fading on the wall. Inside, our breath fogged against glass panels that shouldn't have held temperature this steady. I brushed frost from a metal plate. Stancia was stock -9. Someone had powered a generator recently. Silence versus certainty, one always breaks first. We found footprints in the snow, massive, uneven, dragging slightly on one side. I measured them, 14 inches long, boot tread military but not standard issue. I logged the data, took photos, and filed them in my encrypted tablet. When I showed them to Lieutenant Harris, he laughed it off. Permafrost shifts, he said, make shadows look like prints. Logic versus intuition. He wasn't wrong to want calm. A team that believes in monsters won't finish their mission. But I couldn't ignore the clean edge of a heel print frozen in perfect detail. Further inside, the rooms grew stranger. A mug still sat on a desk, half filled with ice. The chair was pulled out, as if someone had stood only moments ago. Our medic found a piece of gray fabric wedged in the doorway, synthetic, reinforced, Russian manufactured, late 82nds model. Every discovery pulled a thread between now and then, between the living and the left behind. Before leaving, I switched off my body cam. Some things deserve silence until they can be understood. Outside, the wind finally rose, whispering across the ice like a breath through broken glass. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't found the outpost it had allowed itself to be found. And whatever left those prints was still close enough to hear us breathe. By dusk, the sky bruised into violet, a false twilight that never truly turned to night. Through the haze of static snow, I saw movement on the ridge. Slow, deliberate, not the twitchy pace of an animal. I raised the thermal scope again. There he was, a shape too large for a man, too upright for anything else. The signal pulsed strong red against the blue void, human heat, but dense like staring into a furnace behind glass. He dragged something metallic across the snow, a collapsed satellite dish maybe. leaving a deep trough that caught the light. His movements weren't random. They were purposeful, as if reconstructing something. My finger hovered above the radio trigger, yet I didn't press it. Instinct said watch. Training said report. In this place, instinct usually won. Rumors thrive in isolation, and we'd heard plenty stories of Soviet endurance experiments, soldiers built to withstand what nature refused. A human made to survive the unsolvable cold. I had dismissed it like everyone else. But now, seeing that figure, broad shoulders, the uneven gait, the way frost steamed off his body as if he burned from within, I couldn't. I took a still image. The frame came out blurred, distorted by heat shimmer. I printed it from my field printer anyway, the ink streaking across the page in the cold. Proof, or maybe a curse. When I handed it to Harris, he stared for a moment, then tore it in half. "We're not here for myths," he said. His voice trembled slightly, not from cold. The giant, because that's what he was, wasn't charging us, wasn't hiding. He simply moved through the frozen expanse as if it were home. That's what unsettled me most. This wasn't a predator. This was a survivor of something we couldn't imagine. The war had ended decades ago, but some soldiers, it seemed, were never dismissed. As night pressed down, I zipped the torn photo inside my inner pocket. I told myself it was for record keeping, but it felt more like confession. My breath fogged, and for a moment, I swore I saw a second vapor trail beside mine, slow, steady, parallel. Not a ghost, not yet, but not gone either. The message came through at dawn, short, clean, unsigned. Do not engage. Erase all prior transmissions. No header, no encryption key, just a void where authority should have been. The words glowed green on my screen, humming against the silence. Obedience versus instinct, two sides of the same commandment, but only one keeps you alive. I stared at the cursor blinking beneath the message, a pulse against the still Arctic air, as if waiting for me to decide who I was. I read it aloud once, then again. The tone wasn't standard issue, too sharp, too certain. Orders from command always came stamped with protocol codes, but this one carried none. I knew better than to ignore the chain of command, yet the order felt off like a whisper coming from inside your own head. I copied the message onto my encrypted drive, labeling it classified, no origin, and locked it in my field case. Proof before obedience. That's how truth survives. When I told Harris, he just shrugged. Someone higher up doesn't want to panic. Keep your head down. He wasn't wrong. Career soldiers know silence is the real uniform. But silence cuts both ways. I could follow orders, stay loyal, and erase everything we'd seen. Or I could keep watching, documenting, risking the kind of trouble that buries people deeper than snow. That night, I opened my private mission log, an off-record journal stored in a thumb drive small enough to hide in a glove seam. I spoke softly into the recorder. Coordinates verified. Subject sighted again at 2117. Command response. Suppressive. Personal note. Something isn't right. My own voice sounded foreign, steady but wary, as if it already knew how this story would end. Outside, the Arctic stretched wide and white, pretending to sleep. Every gust against the tent canvas sounded like static. I could almost hear him, the giant, somewhere beyond the ridge, alive and waiting. The silence wasn't empty. It was holding its breath. Sometimes I wonder what you would have done. Followed the order or broken it? Would you have trusted the uniform or your gut? There's a thin line between loyalty and blindness, and out there, it's painted white. When the wind finally died, I turned off the recorder and closed the log. My decision hadn't been made aloud, but it had already been made. By the third night, our radios went quiet. Not the usual static or weather interference, just absolute absence. A black silence that even the machines seemed afraid to break. I rebooted the comms twice, rechecked the satellite uplink, and swapped the lithium cells by hand. Still nothing. The Arctic had swallowed our voice. Control versus chaos. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were trained to dominate terrain, yet the land had quietly deleted us. The thermometer read 42 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, metal sweats before it breaks. I wrapped my fingers around the console, feeling the frost bite through the glove. My monitor blinked. No signal detected. Harris cursed under his breath and started checking the relay antenna outside. But the storm had already begun to rise. Within an hour, the horizon blurred into pure white static. We were alone officially, finally, completely. When the wind eased, I went to inventory our supplies. The cargo crates we'd stacked outside were gone. Not shifted, not buried, gone. I followed the drag marks for 50 yards before the trail disappeared beneath snow crust. At the end of it, I found something left behind. A single dog tag, Soviet issue, scratched and half frozen into the ice. The name was barely legible. S. Morozov. I pocketed it, though I didn't know why yet. Inside the tent, the team argued over possible explanations. Polar bears, scavengers, even locals. But there were no locals here. I checked the coordinates. Our position hadn't changed. Yet the satellite connection reported distance variance, 0.8 miles east, as if the system itself was trying to move away from us. Controls slipping through fingers that once believed in precision. I wrote the time down, 19.3 hours. Realism in the ritual. Every entry must be time-stamped even when the world feels timeless. Then I started the Arctic Blackout Protocol. 96 hours. That's the threshold for radio isolation, before command assumes a field team is lost. 96 hours to either re-establish contact or become a story that never reaches home. When I looked back at the ice ridge, I thought I saw movement again, slow, deliberate, too large to be illusion. Maybe he was still watching, or maybe he was simply reminding us that silence too has a pulse. By dawn, the storm had quieted, but the landscape had changed. Where last night there was only an unbroken field of ice, a narrow opening now gaped at the base of the ridge, dark, deliberate, and unnatural. The drag marks from our missing crates led straight toward it. We should have radioed command, but with no signal, duty became guesswork. The others hesitated. I didn't. Sometimes, the only way to find your enemy is to walk into his silence. The entrance was carved cleanly, like a tunnel bored by machines, not weather. The walls shimmered with layers of trapped air, blue and ancient. Each footstep echoed, muted, close, as if the ice itself were listening. We switched our lamps to low beam to preserve heat signatures, but light still scattered in strange ways. What should have reflected back as smooth frost instead fractured into ghostly shapes, like figures half buried in time. Nature versus precision. I marked the path using chemical tags, one drop of luminescent dye every 10 meters, a breadcrumb trail glowing faint green behind us. 50 yards in, the air grew warmer, not colder. That's what made me stop. At 40 degrees Celsius, warmth is no longer comfort, it's anomaly. Somewhere below, machinery was running. We followed the hum deeper until it resolved into rhythm, not steady like a generator, but pulsing 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again. A sound you feel more than hear. The tunnel opened into a chamber lined with metal struts. Soviet serial numbers etched into the steel. Ice had preserved everything. Crates, equipment, faded safety posters, even a single chair bolted to the floor. I brushed off one panel, Termoustanovka, DUA, Thermal Installation Unit. Someone had built this place to control temperature, not survive it. Harris wanted to turn back. "We're not equipped for excavation," he said, voice low, breath trembling against the mask. I almost agreed, but curiosity, once stirred, is a kind of command you can't countermand. I took a sample of the melted frost dripping along the wall. The temperature read +2 degrees Celsius. Something was generating heat recently. I clicked my recorder. Entering secondary cavity, source unknown, audible resonance detected. My voice echoed once, then again, slightly delayed. A double return, 2 voices where there should have been one. That was when I realized the hum wasn't coming from the machines. It was coming from below them. We followed the hum until the tunnel steepened into a stairwell of ice-covered steel. Each step creaked under our boots, the sound sharp against the pressure of air that felt suddenly heavy, almost warm. The deeper we went, the clearer the sound became, a low, rhythmic throb like machinery breathing. When we reached the bottom, our headlamps revealed a chamber too precise to be natural. Rows of consoles, sealed crates, glass canisters clouded with frost. The Soviet red star stamped on every surface. History versus decay. I brushed frost from a control panel. the Cyrillic still visible beneath. Cryogennia teste, Seria M, cryogenic tests, Series M, a clipboard hung beside it, the paper brittle but intact. Subject, Sergei M, height, 2,47 meters. Date, 1987. The realization hit like a cold wave. We weren't chasing a ghost, we'd found his birthplace. Harris muttered. Experimental physiology. Could be genetic enhancement. His tone carried no awe, only dread. I opened a cabinet marked Pitania, expecting rations, but found syringes filled with amber fluid, labels marked adrenaline, corrector. Whatever they had been doing down here wasn't survival, it was creation. Science versus superstition, stripped of ethics. I photographed everything, each console, each file. The prints came out smeared, the ink refusing to dry in the humidity. My gloves stiffened with frost as I flipped through folders filled with biometric readings, endurance logs, and sketches of a man too large for any human frame. The notes described unbroken metabolic stability at 55 degrees Celsius. The subject's vitals were written as if he'd never stopped existing. On the far wall, a reinforced chamber stood half-sealed by ice. A viewing window frosted over from inside. I wiped it clean. Behind the glass, a bed, restraints, and an imprint where a body once lay. The ice beneath it had melted clean through to the metal. The hum we'd followed vibrated through the floor, faint but constant, like the afterbeat of a heart long thought extinct. Later, cross-referencing the tag numbers with my offline archive, I confirmed a match. Soviet endurance projects declassified in 2021 listed Sergei Morozov as missing in action, presumed deceased. The coordinates matched exactly. Myth had found a map. I turned off my lamp. The darkness pulsed back, slow and deliberate. Something down here still remembered how to breathe. The tremor came without warning, a deep, bone-level vibration that turned the air to static. Dust lifted from the consoles. Harris swore, bracing against the railing. But I stayed still. In the Arctic, motion attracts collapse, stillness, survival. When the shaking stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Ice doesn't move on its own. Something had shifted beneath us. We retraced our steps toward the chamber, with the melted imprint. The frost on the viewing glass had vanished completely, replaced by condensation forming from the inside out. Heat radiated from the metal door, faint but real. I reached toward it. The surface was warm enough to fog my glove. The hum we'd heard earlier changed pitch, rising from a mechanical throb to something disturbingly organic. The latch gave with a single pull. The door opened 3 inches, releasing a gust of air that smelled faintly of ozone and salt, the scent of thawed life. Inside, the bed restraints hung loose. The chains had been undone, not broken. I searched the floor for prints, found them immediately. Deep, wide, unmistakable. The same pattern I'd seen days ago outside the facility. The open loop closed in one clean line through the frost. He'd woken long before we arrived. Harris whispered, "He's gone?" But the question sounded wrong. Gone implies departure. This felt like return. The walls dripped steadily, rivulets of meltwater tracing down Soviet insignia until it looked like the symbol itself was bleeding. We scanned for movement, but the radar only showed a single fading heat bloom heading upward through the tunnel. He was already out. I logged the discovery, voice low. Subject chamber open. No signs of forced entry. Residual temperature, 5 degrees Celsius above baseline. The realism grounded me. Data was armor. Facts could hold fear at bay. We sealed the lab behind us, though it felt like sealing a wound that would never close. The hum didn't stop, it followed us, dull and rhythmic, echoing through the ice. As we reached the surface, the horizon glowed faint blue with pre-dawn light. The Arctic looked peaceful again, but I'd learned peace can be camouflage. For the first time since arriving, the white silence didn't comfort me. It listened. It remembered. And as the cold wind brushed my face, I knew whatever had woken beneath that ice hadn't left it behind, it had inherited it. By nightfall, the wind had died, but the radios didn't. Static pulsed through every channel, a steady pattern like Morse code gone feral. Harris thought it was interference from the storm. I knew better. The signal had rhythm. It paused between bursts, as if waiting for a response. We didn't answer. Some silences aren't meant to be filled. Back at the main cabin, I replayed the recordings. The sound wasn't random, it formed repeating intervals, a 6-second loop followed by 2 beats of silence. The cadence matched the biomonitor data we'd recovered from the Soviet archives. Pulse rate, 48 beats per minute. The thing under the ice had a heartbeat, and now it was transmitting. We tracked the source to the North Relay, an obsolete antenna station buried in permafrost. Power logs showed activation 12 hours earlier around the same time the tremor hit. No one had touched that relay in decades. I ran diagnostics, but the system refused to respond. The screen glitched, then displayed a single phrase in Cyrillic. Ya vernulsa. I'd studied enough Russian to translate without thinking. I have returned. Harris wanted to shut everything down. He said we were scientists, not soldiers. But curiosity has its own gravity. It pulls harder than fear. I rerouted power through the auxiliary node, just enough to monitor without transmitting. The signal stabilized instantly. The heartbeat slowed, then synced with ours through the monitors. For a moment, it felt like the entire base was breathing with it. Outside, the aurora spilled green across the black sky, beautiful and wrong. The snow reflected its glow like an open wound. My breath fogged in short bursts, each one caught in the flicker of light. We should leave, Harris muttered. He meant run, but even as he spoke, the signal changed tone lower, steadier, almost like a voice learning to speak through static. Then came the coordinates, latitude and longitude, transmitted 3 times before cutting out completely. When I mapped them, the point landed not far from our own facility, directly beneath the central ice shelf where we'd first seen the fissure. I didn't tell Harris that last part. Some truths don't save anyone. They just mark where the next fracture begins. By midnight, the air was quiet again, but in the hum of the generator, I could still hear it, those 6 seconds of rhythm and 2 beats of silence. Not noise, not interference. A calling pulse, patient as frost. By the time command signal broke through the static, I'd forgotten what human voices sounded like. The transmission came fractured, heavy with distortion, but the words were unmistakable. Eliminate the anomaly. It wasn't a question, not even a directive with nuance. It was the kind of order that flattened thought into obedience. But standing there in the glow of that dying aurora, I realized obedience had already cost too much. Duty demanded action, but conscience demanded silence. I opened the encrypted terminal, watching the cursor blink like a heartbeat. The protocol was clear: upload confirmation, mark target neutralized, attach timestamp. I typed the report line by line, every keystroke deliberate. Instead of coordinates of the cavern, I entered a decoy grid 3 miles east. The timestamp I delayed by precisely 11 minutes, syncing it to the known GPS latency from polar orbit. It was a small lie with a large shadow, one that could pass any audit if I kept my silence intact. The wind outside screamed against the comms dish, but inside my helmet, the world was still. I attached a false sensor log, a simple binary flip in the core file, reading temp -273, 15C. Absolute zero. Nothing survives that. The system accepted it without hesitation, a machine's idea of faith. That falsified number became my shield. Command's reply came minutes later. Confirmed. Extraction in T-0400. Return alone. I stared at the words longer than I should have. Return alone had weight. It meant they already knew Harris was missing. Maybe they suspected more. Maybe they'd seen through the silence I thought protected me. Yet, silence has always been a better weapon than confession. I sent one final ping routine, casual, then shut the terminal down for good. Outside, the horizon had begun to bleed light. The ice reflected it back like mirrors, turning the world into a field of glass. The air was thin, the kind that stings your lungs with every breath. But I breathed anyway. The report was filed, the anomaly erased on record, and the truth buried beneath 11 minutes of bureaucratic lag. That was the moment I understood what silence could really do. It doesn't just hide you. It rewrites reality in your favor. The storm above us roared like the world trying to erase itself, but under the ice, there was only breath and flickering light. The heater cast a weak orange circle against the frozen walls, its warmth barely enough to keep my fingers from going numb. The giant sat across from me, motionless except for his eyes pale, reflective, too knowing. For hours, neither of us spoke. Silence was safer than words. Yet in that stillness, I felt the first fracture in what I'd been ordered to believe. When the wind reached its peak, he leaned forward and pressed a finger into the frost-dusted floor, dragging slow, deliberate lines. At first, I thought he was marking symbols, data, maybe coordinates. Then I saw the word form in Cyrillic. Sin. Sun. The line trembled slightly at the end, like he wasn't sure how it was supposed to finish. The heater clicked, and in its pulse, the letters caught the light like carved glass. It was easier, once, to see him as a construct flesh engineered for endurance, muscle built for war. But this gesture, this single word cut through that illusion. Humanity versus creation. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was grief disguised as instinct. He turned to me, eyes uncertain, as if waiting for recognition. I didn't answer. I just nodded once, slowly, letting the quiet stretch between us. I pulled the emergency blanket from my pack, wrapped it around him despite the absurdity of it. He didn't need warmth, not the way I did, but he held the fabric as if memory had texture. For a moment, I saw something flicker across his expression. Confusion, sorrow, maybe the shadow of a name. My recorder light blinked red in my peripheral vision, battery low. I considered turning it off, but I couldn't. Some truths need witnesses, even if they never reach anyone else. I whispered the word back, almost involuntarily. Sin. His gaze shifted just slightly, as though the sound reached some hidden place logic couldn't touch. Outside, the storm began to fade. Above us, the Arctic regained its silence. But beneath it, something older had awakened. I realized then that the line between human and creation wasn't written in DNA or steel, it was written in memory. And this one remembered enough to mourn. The wind had quieted by morning, leaving the world above frozen in stillness, but the storm had only moved inside me. I connected the salvage drive to the terminal, its casing etched with the same Soviet emblem we'd seen in the chamber. The screen flickered, once, twice, then resolved into a directory of old Cyrillic file names and numeric codes. No encryption worth the name, just time's decay guarding its secrets. I bypassed the root lock manually, tracing decades-old architecture line by line. Then the videos appeared, grainy reels labeled with months and temperatures. 1,960, 162C, 1,960, 473C. Each file opened like a wound. In the first, a group of men in heavy coats observed through glass as subjects were locked into transparent chambers. Breath crystallized instantly on the walls. The scientists took notes with mechanical calm, their voices detached. One of them, broad-shouldered, quiet, was the giant, younger, almost unrecognizable except for the eyes. He smiled once, just before the test began, a small, human smile that had no place in that frozen hell. Science versus cruelty. The film made no distinction. Heart rate, temperature, oxygen saturation, every metric captured meticulously while humanity drained from the frame. Another clip showed injections, muscle biopsies, and controlled frostbite recovery. I stopped halfway through, unable to watch the rest, yet unable to delete it. Truth deserved to survive, even if no one wanted to see it. I checked the metadata. The last login, the 14th of March 1989, 2 hours 17 minutes and 8 seconds UTC. That single timestamp anchored the horror in history, proof that it wasn't myth, not rumor, but a record. The cursor blinked under the date, like a silent accusation. I archived the footage under a new directory, Operation Sleepwalker. It was a name vague enough to deflect attention, yet precise enough to hide in plain sight. The files compressed slowly, the progress bar crawling like time itself. I added one last note to the folder, for whoever still believes the dead are data. Then I encrypted it, triple-keyed, mirrored it to an off-grid drive. When the upload completed, the screen dimmed to black. My reflection stared back at me, part soldier, part archivist, neither entirely clean. Some truths burn colder than fire, and some silences weigh more than orders. It started with the hum of the comms unit, too clean to be random static, too rhythmic to be chance. Someone had pulsed an active beacon through our encrypted channel, short bursts at 12-second intervals. A signal like that doesn't happen by accident. I checked the logs. One outgoing packet, unscheduled, from inside our own perimeter. Loyalty versus ambition. That's what it always comes down to. I didn't need a full audit to know who it was, Corporal Reyes, the one who kept asking how command would rate our findings. He wanted to be noticed, maybe even decorated. But the coordinates he'd transmitted weren't his ticket home. They were a death sentence for all of us. By the time I cut the signal, the confirmation ping had already gone through. The satellite link above our sector blinked online. Command's reply came in less than 2 minutes. Drone strike authorized. Window 3. Target radius 400 meters. There was no room for outrage, only reaction. I packed the drives, the portable heater, the oxygen cells. The giant stood near the tunnel mouth, watching me with the stillness of someone who understood danger by instinct, not language. When I motioned for him to follow, he didn't hesitate. His silence wasn't ignorance anymore, it was trust. We moved deeper into the ice tunnels, the floor groaning under our boots. The air grew thinner, colder, quieter. Every step farther from the beacon was a step out of reach of betrayal. I could hear the faint echo of the drone engines above metal wings cutting through wind, searching. The irony wasn't lost on me. Command thought they were erasing a threat, but they were only confirming one. Reyes never saw it coming. I caught the flash through the fissure, a bloom of white light that swallowed everything, then nothing. Silence followed, total and unbroken, stretching through the tunnels like a living thing. I turned off every remaining transmitter, crushed the comm chips under my heel, and pressed my back to the ice. The world above burned for 9 seconds, then went still again. Silence now equaled safety. The giant looked toward the ceiling, as if listening for something I couldn't hear. When the echoes finally faded, he exhaled once long, controlled, almost human. In that hollow beneath the Arctic, betrayal had become our shield, and silence our only language left. The wind that night could have flayed skin from bone, but it was the perfect cover. The storm had turned the horizon into a blur of shifting white. No up or down, just the endless pulse of snow and static. I'd studied enough Arctic interference reports to know the cold could be my accomplice. At 40 degrees Celsius, thermal signatures fractured heat scattering in patterns the sensors couldn't parse. Command's drone would see ghosts, and I would give it plenty to chase. I unpacked 3 emergency flares, an old signal emitter, and a strip of thermal foil from our med kit. The plan was simple. Mislead the machine. Let the sky finish the work. I hiked a half-mile east of our shelter, each step swallowed by snow that reached to my knees. My visor fogged with every breath, but the rhythm kept me steady light. Move, bury. The first flare burned a furious red, casting shadows that danced on the walls of ice like living things. Technology versus terrain. They had sensors, algorithms, and satellites. I had the storm and silence. I planted the foil around the flare's residue, angled to reflect residual heat back toward the sky. The emitter I buried just deep enough to mimic movement, a pulsing signal like a body shifting under snow. The data would read like a perfect target. Stationary, warm, alive. Back at the cavern, I powered down every internal source heater, comms, even my wrist beacon. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Through the fissure, I saw the drone's strobe blink through the snow, a false star descending. It circled once, then twice, scanning. The flare echoes caught its sensors. I counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Impact. The explosion was distant, muffled by the blizzard, but its light painted the underclouds in red and gold. Snow geysered upward, then settled in slow motion, a silent avalanche over the decoy valley. 30 feet of compacted ice and debris sealed the false coordinates forever. When the sound faded, the silence felt earned clean, total. The giant watched from the cave mouth, his gaze steady, unflinching. I met his eyes and realized he understood more than I had imagined. Machines trust data. People trust instinct. That night, the storm trusted me. Above us, the drone lights vanished, swallowed whole by the white. By dawn, the world had gone silent again. No engines, no signals, no pursuit. Command had done the math and declared us dead. The strike logs would mark the coordinates as a confirmed kill, filed neatly under containment successful. It should have felt like relief, but freedom born from a lie has a way of tasting hollow. I studied the map one last time, tracing a return route along an abandoned ice highway that once connected the outposts before the Soviet withdrawal. The path ran west, toward extraction. Safe, predictable. But when I motioned for the giant to follow, he didn't move. He stood at the edge of the crevasse, facing east, the direction of the storm's fading light, the direction of Russia. His breath came slow, steady, condensing into brief clouds that looked almost like speech. He raised a hand, the same way soldiers once did to signal hold. Then he spoke, low but clear enough to cut through the wind. Tell them I was real, freedom versus captivity. For me, survival meant going home. For him, it meant not being erased. I saw it then, the divide between us wasn't human versus creation. It was memory versus denial. He had lived his entire existence as an experiment, a rumor buried under ice and command reports. The thought of rescue meant nothing to him if the world refused to believe he'd ever lived. I tried to argue, to gesture toward the route, the supplies, the faint signals still blinking weakly from my transceiver. He shook his head. His expression held something I hadn't seen before, resolve without resentment. He pointed east again, toward the unseen horizon, and then turned away. The wind caught the edge of his coat, flaring it like a banner before swallowing his silhouette whole. I stood there a long time, waiting for him to look back. He never did. The map on my wrist blinked a soft reminder. Route lost. Recalculate? I didn't. Some paths aren't meant to be found twice. As I began my trek west, I left the recorder running, his final words echoing softly in its log. Tell them I was real. That line wasn't a plea, it was a command. The base smelled like recycled air and antiseptic lies. They ushered me into a windowless debriefing room, the kind designed to strip away comfort and memory. 3 officers sat behind the glass faces blurred by frost and fluorescent light. They wanted a story, not the truth. So I gave them one. I handed over the mission report, the paper still damp from the condensation on my gloves. Weather-related losses. It read in the incident header. Equipment failure, structural collapse, limited visibility. Every sentence sterile, every omission deliberate. Truth versus record. They wanted numbers, not names. Closure, not questions. The lead interrogator, a colonel with eyes like ground glass, asked once, just once, if we had encountered any unregistered variables. I met his gaze and said, only wind. He wrote something in his notebook, then nodded, as if that word alone sealed the case. The silence that followed was the sound of bureaucracy exhaling. When they dismissed me, I was told to file my remaining materials with archives and report for medical review. I walked straight past the infirmary to the data room. The terminals hummed in low rhythm, their blinking lights almost comforting. I inserted the encrypted drive Operation Sleepwalker and initiated a routine checksum. The system accepted it, labeling the directory classified cold storage. Then, under the pretense of backup redundancy, I slipped in a second thumb drive and mirrored the files in silence. The copy process took 7 minutes, long enough to feel the weight of what I was doing. I labeled the drive in my own handwriting, for archives, not Command's archives, mine, the kind that don't exist on paper. When the screen flashed, transfer complete, I ejected it, pocketed the drive, and shut the system down. The lights dimmed to their usual Arctic pallor. The silence motif had returned, no longer protection but consequence. Every secret kept under ice adds weight to the soul, and mine was already cracking. Outside, the cold hit like absolution. The sky above the base was a dull gray mirror, reflecting nothing. I told myself silence was safety, but the truth was simpler. Silence was the only thing left that still obeyed me. They flew me to DC in a jet with no insignia, just matte gray skin and quiet engines. The city was unseasonably warm, the air thick and artificial after months of ice. I was escorted through 3 security checkpoints, each quieter than the last, until I reached the sub-level conference room, a place built for secrets, not truth. The panel sat elevated behind a semicircle of black glass. No names, only titles. Defense Oversight, Arctic Operations, Bioethics, Liaison, Bureaucracy versus Reality. They didn't ask how I'd survived. They asked what remained. That word remained hung in the air like a verdict waiting to be signed. I opened my briefcase and laid out exactly what they'd requested. Coordinates, temperatures, a casualty list that fit their records, nothing more. No mention of the giant, no hint of the Cold War footage, no ghosts from beneath the ice. The facts were cold, factual, and useless, perfectly sterile. The chairwoman leaned forward. "Captain, are you certain no anomalous entities were recovered?" Her tone was smooth, but her eyes betrayed the question's weight. I paused long enough to let silence work for me. "None that survived the conditions," I said evenly. The phrasing satisfied her need for closure without surrendering an inch of truth. They pressed for details, wind speeds, core readings, structural failure metrics, but each answer I gave narrowed their world, not widened it. I had learned how to weaponize silence, let them hear what they wanted between the words, let the quiet suggest compliance. In a room full of language, silence is the most persuasive liar. The hearing concluded in under 40 minutes. My official summary would read, subject non-compliance minimal, containment complete. As I stood to leave, one of the younger aides, too curious for his own safety, asked if I'd seen anything extraordinary. I met his gaze and said, "Only the limits of what we call control." He didn't understand it, not yet. But one day, he would. Outside the hearing room, the corridor hummed faintly with recycled air. The noise felt almost alive. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket, feeling the small weight of the hidden thumb drive pressing against my palm. Silence wasn't absence anymore. It was armor. It started on a Sunday morning quiet, uneventful until my encrypted inbox began to tremble under the weight of strangers. "Is this yours? Were you there? What is he?" Subject lines in every language, from people who shouldn't have known I existed. Someone had posted a 30-second clip to an anonymous channel. A blurred figure, 8 feet tall, crossing a frozen plain under aurora light. No voice, no timestamp, just the sound of wind and the slow, deliberate crunch of snow. The footage ended abruptly, as if the camera had died of cold or fear. Within hours, it spread. Forums lit up with arguments, hoax, cryptid, Soviet mutant, art project, divine messenger, denial versus exposure. The department issued a sterile statement calling it digitally fabricated, but the denial came too quickly, too polished. Anyone who has lived under bureaucracy knows that kind of certainty only follows panic. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I told myself silence was still protection, but as the clip looped endlessly across feeds, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The world wasn't laughing. It was listening. People weren't dissecting a monster, they were searching for meaning in his walk, his direction, the way he disappeared into white. Late that night, I opened an old drive, the one marked for archives. The metadata hadn't changed, but a duplicate folder had appeared, mirrored into a foreign server. Someone had accessed it, copied it, and left a message in Cyrillic. "He walks home." My first instinct was to erase everything. Protocol demanded containment, but I didn't. I let it breathe. For the first time, the story was beyond me, beyond orders, beyond the cold bureaucracy that tried to bury it. The giant's existence had slipped through the cracks of silence, transformed into something no command could suppress: belief. As I watched the clip again, slowed to a crawl, I noticed a brief flicker before the frame ended, his hand lifting slightly, fingers curling as if in a wave. Maybe it was a glitch, maybe not. The next morning, I deleted the drive, burned the laptop, and walked outside into the first snowfall of the year. For once, I didn't feel the need to explain anything. Months later, I returned to the Arctic not on orders, not for evidence, but for something wordless. The transport plane dropped me near the old coordinates, where the horizon swallowed the sky. Everything was as it had been, white upon white, endless, unmoved. The world here didn't remember names, only temperatures and wind. I walked for hours, following faint memories rather than maps. The ice had shifted, but not enough to hide what mattered. The air was sharp, Silent, the kind of silence that hums at the edge of hearing, alive with memory. My boots sank with each step, each crunch echoing against the vast stillness. When I reached the spot, a ridge overlooking the buried valley, I stopped. From my pocket, I pulled the single dog tag that had survived the mission, its letters nearly erased by frost and time. I knelt, scraped away the crusted snow, and pressed it into the ice. No speech, no salute, just stillness. War versus peace, I finally understood the difference. War is noise that never ends. Peace is silence that forgives. The wind rose briefly, scattering loose flakes over the tag until it vanished again, claimed by the white. I stayed there, letting the cold numb my hands, waiting for something, maybe a sign, maybe nothing at all. But the silence didn't accuse me anymore. It didn't echo with what I'd done or failed to do. It simply existed, pure and unbroken. In that stillness, I realized the white silence was never emptiness. It was memory without pain, presence without demand, the world's way of closing the story without words. As I turned to leave, a faint shimmer of aurora bled across the horizon, green and gold over endless snow. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a tall shadow moving within it, heading east, steady and human. Then it was gone. I didn't follow. Some stories don't end in discovery, they end in return. I left the ridge without looking back, the silence following me like a companion, gentle and whole. The final report is written in first person, as all truth should be. No embellishments, no directives, just the quiet account of what happened and what didn't. I choose my words the way a surgeon holds a scalpel, calm, precise, deliberate. Each sentence is a line carved through official silence. I wasn't sent to witness anything. I was sent to end it. But even now, as I type, the cursor blinking like a pulse against the white screen, I know that mission orders only told half the story. They said, eliminate the anomaly. They didn't say what to do when the anomaly spoke, or when it remembered being someone's son. I write about the data, the coordinates, the frostbite cases. I note the loss of communication, the interference, the equipment failures. The facts are there, clean, verifiable, harmless. What isn't written is the weight of his silence beside that heater, the way he traced letters into ice as if searching for himself. Those belong to another kind of record, the one no file will ever hold. Silence versus legacy, I understand that divide now. Silence can bury truth, but it can also protect it until the world is ready. The drive marked for archives rests in a locked drawer under my name, waiting for a time when proof won't cost lives. They'll think this report is just closure. In a way, it is, but not for them. For me, it's a promise to keep looking beneath what's erased, to listen where others only measure. I close the document with one final line, the only one that still feels honest. They sent me to erase a ghost. I returned with proof that he was human. The signature uploads, time-stamped, sealed. Outside, the snow keeps falling, covering everything, preserving it all. I'll spend the rest of my career uncovering the truths buried under ice.